Let's jump to another one of your string quartets, the one that you
Mhm.
wrote for Kronos.
Well, okay, so the idea of that piece that I made for Kronos, the name of the piece is "And the Movement of the Tongue," and that's taken directly as a quote from a fragment of a sentence that was being said by one of the people I interviewed. But the idea of that piece was to explore speaking accents. David Harrington and I came up with this idea together when we met because he was commissioning this piece to be part of a festival they were doing of California composers or San Francisco based composers specifically. And so he said, I love the way you work with language in your pieces. And I'm wondering if you can make something for us that does that. And then he was saying maybe it can be about, because in San Francisco we have so many people from all over the globe who come here, so the San Francisco is filled with all these different speaking accents. So maybe the piece can focus on that.
I used to look at people how they move their tongue.
Your tongue goes into your palate.
And the movement of the tongue, where the tongue should be.
From my mother tongue.
So to make the piece, I interviewed between 30 and 40 people, all English speakers, but people who spoke English either from different regional accents within the United States, so people from all over the country, or people who are English speakers from other English speaking countries like Canada and Australia, and um, or uh, people who speak English as a second language. Um, so their accent is from their original tongue. One of the people who was like a North Carolinian that I interviewed was this guy named John Love, who's a local artist in Charlotte. And he talked about Henry Louis Gates. And so he was proposing that when they put Henry in those handcuffs on his front porch, that at that point he probably got real, this is how he put it, real hood. And his voice was so musical when they put Henry in those handcuffs. It was like, there was like this really, and I was like, that's going to be beautiful in strings.
When they put Henry in those handcuffs. When they put Henry in those handcuffs. When they put Henry in those handcuffs. On his front porch. When they put Henry in those handcuffs. When they put Henry in those handcuffs. When they put Henry in those handcuffs. On his front porch. How hood he is. How hood he is. You know what I'm saying? This the kind of educated professor. How street he is.
I have to say, when you ask about like what made me choose particular things to put into these pieces, often the reason is to do with the musicality of the speech, because I'm looking for phrases that sound musical. And that might be because they're very pitch heavy, like that the pitches, or that like that the person almost is sing-songy in that they're doing like a big intervallic jumps within their speech. I'm really in love with the music that is embedded in speech sounds, and that I think a lot of people think um, that speech is unpitched. But like if you ask somebody like, what's the difference between talking and singing? A lot of people would say, well, singing has pitch and talking doesn't. But in fact, there's no such thing as a sound that doesn't have pitch, because pitch is just frequency. And every sound that gets made has frequency. And so if you take speech sounds and just hear them in the normal way, you don't perceive them as being pitched because the pitches are so random and continuously changing that we don't latch onto it. But if you take a little section of a speech and you repeat it even a few times, immediately you start to hear the fundamental tone of every syllable, you know, rises up in your consciousness, and you begin to hear the melodies there, and of course the rhythmic material. And then the other thing I started doing was I started transcribing the pitches and rhythms that are in that speech sound, and then either singing them myself or putting them in instruments.
When I go home to Tennessee,
It usually goes back to their roots when they go home.
if I go home, I slip right back into it.
Whenever I'm around my brothers, my accent becomes very Afrikaans.
The funny thing is when I return home and I speak in Italian, they tell me, oh, you have an American accent, which I think is ridiculous.